all of you here this morning. We got a little bit of an inconvenience. We got a broken water pipe, so we don't have restrooms. We got coffee being made the old way, melting ice and, trying to make it like that. So it'll be ready here in a minute. Bill's standing guard over there. So, but anyway, it's good to see you. We got, since we don't do prayer requests upstairs anymore, I just want to hit a couple of high points with you. Don't forget Robert, he's going to be having surgery on the 27th in Dallas, and so please remember him. Many of you are familiar with the Bella family. This is Carol's daughter, one of her daughter's husband's father passed away this week. So Mr. Clarence Bella, so remember that family if you would. And then our daughter-in-law found out, we told you a week ago or so that she has cancer. It's in the bone, it's in her organs, it's pretty much all over her. So please, we ask you to pray for them, and I know that you will. That's Angela O'Quinn and all that. So, and I know that you may have others. Please let Miss Claudia know, write it down so she'll have it. Send her a text, send her an email, give her something in writing so she'll be sure and have it. Second chapter of Revelation this morning. We started last week. We talked about the church at Smyrna. What was the condemnation of the church at Smyrna? Didn't have one. That was the good thing. I mean, they were in persecution. They were having all kinds of issues that they were dealing with, but they did not have any condemnation from the Lord. Things will be slightly different this week because we're going to be looking at the church at Pergamos in verse 12 of chapter 2. And this, you may see Pergamos or you may see Pergamum. Either way, it's the same place. It just depends on whether you're looking at the Greek or the English translation. So, but Pergamos was a wealthy city. It was a city of great learning. It was a city full of idols and idol worship. It's fabled to have been built by one of the sons of Hercules. And you know who Hercules was, he was the strong guy, but I never heard of his son doing anything. But anyway, never mind about that. But the people there worshiped a number of Greek gods, everyone from Athena to Zeus, the whole range. The city was built on an acropolis, and during one of the sieges of the city, they were, safe. There wasn't any problem with it. And one of the generals who was in charge of the besieging army said that he would make a rich man of any of his soldiers who could find a way into the city, because there was no way to do it except up a steep cliff and all of that, because the rest of it was just a drop off. It was built out, we would say maybe on a ledge or something like that. Well, one of their soldiers was watching one day, and one of the soldiers up on top of the rampart dropped his helmet. Well, he worked his way down. There was a path that only they knew, and got his helmet and went back up. And that night, they used that path to overrun them. So, there's a lot of things talked about in Pergamos. There were many temples there. There was a temple the first temple in this area to be built to Augustus Caesar. And it was a really beautiful city. It was also notable, it had a great library, over 200,000 volumes. The only one that was bigger was in Alexandria, Egypt, and it had 300,000 volumes, until the Muslims invaded and burned it to the ground with all the volumes in it. So now Alexandria has no library, and Pergamos has the 200,000 volume library. So it became the prominent place of learning, after that. One of the interesting little things I found was that they developed parchment. You say, well, that's not that interesting. They were buying papyrus from Egypt. Well, when the king or the leader, the Greek leader there at Pergamos, tried to entice the librarian from Alexandria to come to Pergamos, the Egyptians got mad and wouldn't sell them papyrus anymore, which is made of a plant. So they started making it out of parchment, which is made from animal skin. So they were pretty industrious and inventive and all that kind of stuff. But it also was a great medical school. And I know that you've seen a medical staff, and as it stands up, it's got a couple of snakes coiled around it. Well, that began in Pergamos, and the guy that was the god of healing was Asclepius. And Asclepius, one of his symbols, or his symbol for his medical stuff, was a snake. Well, there were people who would travel hundreds of miles. Now, we're not talking about on an airplane or, in a car. We're talking about walking or riding a horse or a donkey or whatever. But they would travel hundreds of miles to go to his temple to sleep on the floor, hoping that a snake would touch them. And if it touched them, then they supposedly would be healed. Now, if a snake touches me, there's not a heal, there's a funeral coming up, but that's just me. I ain't going to his temple. I can tell you that right now. All right. But if you were sick, that was where you went to get healed. And of course, him being the father of medicine, they use that symbol of the snake on the staff today, even in the medical field. It was filled with all kinds of superstitious and pagan and idol worship. And now we have this segment of Christianity there that we're looking at that John is writing this letter to. Actually, Christ is writing it. I keep saying Paul. John is just penning it because this is Jesus actually talking to them. And so, they had all the Greek influence, they had the Roman influence, they had government oppression, they had economic oppression, they had a lot of things going on. And it might be kind of like trying to live in Las Vegas or Washington today, possibly, I don't know. Is it still there? Is the city of Pergamos still in existence? No. There is a small village, I say small village, about 10,000, that's close to there, called Bergama, which is a kind of a corrupted interpretation of Pergamos. But the city of Pergamos is no longer there. There's ruins there, and there are people who go and excavate there and dig up all kinds of old relics and things like that. But the city's gone. Now, let's start in verse 12 of Revelation 2. And to the angel of the church of Pergamos write, these things saith he which hath the sharp sword with two edges. I know thy works, and where thou dwell, even where Satan's seat is. And thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth. Now notice he said twice there about Satan's dwelling. But I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. So hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Repent, or else I will come unto thee quickly, and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knows, saving he that receives it. So there's a lot in this, and we may or may not get finished talking about Pergamum today, but that's okay. It's not by accident, I don't think, that the salutation is to the church, or to the angel of the church of Pergamos, these things saith he which hath the sword with two edges. Now, what does a two-edged sword signify in the Scriptures?
Authority and judgment.
Okay, authority and judgment. The sword can divide asunder the soul and the flesh. It can basically, when we're talking about this, we're talking about the power that the Lord has. that he can see the hearts of men. He knows the saved and he knows the unsaved. You can fool mankind. You cannot fool the Lord. He knows who belongs to him. And so when he starts off like that, that gives us the impression that there's at least two factions involved here. And there are. There are the saved, and then there are the pagans, the unsaved, the heathens that were a multitude there in this city. And in verse 13, then, he starts with a commendation. He says, I know your works, and I know where you dwell, even in where Satan's seat is. You know, if you meet somebody, sometimes you ask them where they're from. Have you ever met someone, they say, oh, I live over at Satan's seat. You know, no, they don't do that because, nobody wants to acknowledge that they're living where Satan is, I would think. But the Lord understands what's going on in any city, in any heart, in any individual, in any great multitude of people. And so he knows that these believers are surrounded by corruption and paganism and heresy and false teachings and everything else that's against him. And so he is commending them or allowing them to know that he is aware of their circumstances. And he says, and thou holdest my name, hold fast to my name. In other words, you're faithful. You are doing some good stuff. You're standing up for me. And you have not denied my faith. And then he says, even in those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth. What do you know about Antipas? Do we find him anywhere in the scriptures other than here? Not really. So who is this guy and what happened and why did he make it into this book as being named as an individual who was faithful? Well, Antipas was a believer. He was a devout believer. He was very faithful to the Lord. And the people, not the government, but the people dragged him probably to the temple of Zeus or where they worship Caesar, which may have been the same building. And they told him to denounce the Lord and to announce or to give homage to Caesar. And he refused. He wouldn't do it. So as a mob, this wasn't a legal proceeding by any means, but as a mob, they took him to a big bronze bull and put him inside it and started a fire under it and roasted him alive because of his faith. Now, the next time you think things are getting a little bit tough for you, you think about Antipas. And do you have that kind of faith? I don't know that I would. But is that something new? No, not really. Because if you look back in Leviticus chapter 20, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. So Leviticus chapter 20, and beginning in verse 1, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, again thou shalt say to the children of Israel, whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Moloch, or Molech, he shall surely be put to death, and the people of the land shall stone him with stones. So now who is Molech? Molech was a Canaanite god, deity, and what would happen is that the Canaanites who worshipped him would take their children and sacrifice them alive on Molech. And he was had the head of a bull and the body of a man and stood with his hands out. Well, they would lay the child in his hands and build a fire under him and burn him alive. And God says, anybody, Israel or anybody traveling with you, because not everybody traveling was an Israelite. They had some others that were on the outskirts of the camp that were traveling with him. Most of them were Israelites. He said, excuse me, if any of you do this, you will die. You are to die. You're to be stoned by the population. Okay? Then he says in verse 3, and I will set my face against that man, the one who offers his child, and will cut him off from among his people, because he hath given of his seed unto Molech to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do any way hide their eyes from the man, when he gives of his seed unto Molech, and kill him not, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and will cut him off, and all that go whoring after him to commit whoredom with Molech from among the people. And the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits, and after wizards, to go a whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul, and will cut him off from among his people. Sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be ye holy, for I am the Lord your God. Does that have any relevance today? How many kids have been aborted? Do you think God's okay with mankind's interpretation now? Well, that's a woman's right. I don't think so. I think what he said to Moses and the children of Israel in the 20th chapter of Leviticus is still applicable today. And even if the child hasn't been born, and you realize that California and New York are trying to pass laws that will make it legal to kill a child who is 28 days old or younger. So you can even be born and be a month old now and die if they choose to do it. So this is nothing new that we see Antipas being sacrificed in the bull, because this was happening in Canaan back in the days of Moses, 2,000 years earlier. Well, man-made gods only have the power of man, or Satan sometimes. And God is above all and is the only one to be worshiped. There is no other God to be worshiped. Somebody says, well, you should worship God more than other gods. No. You worship God alone, no other gods. That's all. That's the end of it. And so we will see as we go on through our study later on, probably in the next 3 to 4 years at the rate we're going, in Revelation 13, in verse 13, that there will be another idol that man will worship. In Revelation 13:13, and he doth great wonders. Now he's talking about the false prophet, which will be the religious leader, worldwide religious leader at the time, during the tribulation period. And he doth great wonders, so that he makes the fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the light of the beast being the Antichrist, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. You're just going to have to wait and find out what that means. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, this inanimate object. He had the power to give life to it, and that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would, I misread that, excuse me, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So idol worship will come to a head during the tribulation, because there'll be a idol made that looks like the Antichrist, and you either worship or die. And so this cycle is coming around again. But in the time that we're reading about today, Antipas was a faithful follower. He refused to be a one who would denounce God, denounce Christ, and it cost him his life. And we think that if the air conditioner's a little bit cold or the water's not working, that we're being persecuted. We don't know what persecution really is. If you wish, look back in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5. And look at verse 6. Deuteronomy 5, verse 6. I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Thou shalt have none other gods before me. This is the first commandment. This is the one that sets the tone for all the rest. Thou shalt not make thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the waters beneath the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself unto them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. So there's the authority for not worshiping gods or idols or whatever we might put up these days. Now just think about it. How can money or prestige or leisure or whatever really be a god? Because it's something man has come up with, it's something man elevates, but it has no power, no authority on its own. And if you asked some Christians today, not just the world, we're talking about Christians. If you ask Christians that what would happen if someone said that you had to sacrifice your child, what would they say? No way. There's no way I'm sacrificing my child. And then they take that child by the hand and go buy them a telephone that has internet access with everything around the world and all the vileness that they can come up with. Or they take them to ball games on Sunday instead of to church. Or whatever. You can think about 1,000 things probably other than teaching them about the Lord. We sacrifice our children all the time and our grandchildren all the time today as Christians because we teach them to look for other things that man provides instead of what God says. Something to think about. That we'll let them sit and watch television, and you know what's on television, the lust, the homosexual overtones, and the selfishness and the greed, and you watch TV, you know what's going on. But do we ever sit with them and read the Bible? Do we ever sit with them and say, hey, that is what you don't need to do because this is what you need to do? Millions of Christian family children are being indoctrinated by TV and internet and telephone and all of that today, and very little teaching of the scriptures. We have basically become an idol worshiping nation, even as Christians. Now, I'm not saying all of you, but you probably know somebody that does things similar to that. So this is what we find Pergamos doing. Now, this is my own personal opinion. I think today's church is probably more like Pergamos than maybe any other church that's mentioned in Revelation. And here's why. Because as Antipas was a martyr for Christ, we won't even say anything about Christ unless we feel okay, unless we feel comfortable. We'll talk about him here because we think we're full friends and nobody's going to ridicule us. Certainly nobody's going to try to use the law against us for that. But do we go out into the world and talk about the Lord? Do we go out into the world and share the gospel with people? We have not seen the first-hand persecution that Polycarp did in Smyrna, nor Antipas here at Pergamos. But it's coming. And you may not see it, and your children may not see it, but by the time you get to your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, who knows? It may be here, but it's coming. So, in verse 13, 12 and 13, everything's going good. The people at Pergamos are reading this letter and they're thinking, we're doing some good stuff. God's commending us here. And then they get to verse 14. And 14 says, but I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto angels, and to commit fornication. Now, when he says you have there them that hold that doctrine, where is there? Is it the idol worship in the city of Pergamos?
Maybe in the church.
It is the church. This is in the church. That's what he's talking about. He's bringing it home. This is going on in the very pews that you sit in the very building that you go to worship God in. And God says, or the Lord says, I am warning you about this. You've got to make some changes. So he starts out by saying, basically, three things that are a problem: the doctrine of Balaam, immorality, and idolatry. Now, the doctrine of Balaam. You have heard, or maybe you're familiar with, the story of the donkey that spoke to a guy, right? Well, that was Balaam. Balaam's donkey talked to him. Why did he talk to him? Because Balaam was a prophet of God, but he loved money. He loved money. Balak, the Moabite king, contacted him and said, if you'll come put a curse on Israel, I'll give you a lot of money. So he was going to do it. He was headed that way. And God told him, don't do it. But he was going to go do it anyway. And now on his journey, he's traveling along, and the path gets a little narrow, and the donkey balks. And so he beats him on the head a few times and makes him go on, and then he balks again, and he knocks him around a little bit and gets him going, and then finally the donkey just lays down. And he gets off and starts beating him, and the donkey says, why are you beating me? Now that's cue for me to get out of town, but not Balaam. He was still there. And he said, don't you see that angel up there? And his eyes were open. He saw this huge angel carrying a sword. He said, if we go there, we're going to die. So he saved Balaam's life. And you think Balaam ought to have jumped on that donkey, give him a big bowl of oats or something, whatever he wanted, and headed back home. But where did he go? He went on to Balak. And ultimately, and you can read all this in Numbers 22, 23, 24, and 25, the chapters there in Numbers. But he went on to Balak and ended up, he didn't curse Israel because God told him not to do it. But what he did, he told Balak, he said, look, if you'll let your women marry those Israelite men, they will become pagan worshipers and they'll follow you. You'll rule over them. And that's exactly what happened. So what does that have to do with the church at Pergamos? Well, the society of Pergamos was, they not only allowed prostitution, they encouraged it. And that's from writers of that time, that time frame there. They encouraged it, and many of the influential writers spoke about it. But sin had entered the church at Pergamos. Now look what he said in verse 13. I know your works and where you dwell, to Satan's seed, and you hold fast to my name. These people looked like warriors for God. But the problem was, within their own camp, within their own church, they were letting the world come in. They were letting the world infiltrate and begin to, dilute their worship and their faith in the Lord. Sin had entered the church, and primarily through immorality. And then it would manifest itself, thirdly, by idolatry, because they would begin eating the meat worshipped or sacrificed to idols that had been worshipped. And there is some indication that they may have even had idol worship within the church itself. Not 100% sure about that, but it would not be far-fetched. You say, well, that would never happen in one of our churches today. We would never do anything like that. Well, I hope not. But how many times have you heard of pastors having affairs or having deacons steal from the church or whatever? They're people. They're subject to enticements of Satan, just like everybody else is. And so if you're in a congregation that happens and you have the mindset, well, that's not that bad. I'm not going to condemn him for that. Then we have stopped standing for the Lord and we're starting to stand for the world now. We're watering down our testimony. We're watering down our faith. And so this was going on in Pergamos. But there were those few that the Lord was talking to that were still faithful. They were holding out. He says there in verse 15, so thou hast also, in addition to the ones that are doing the Balaam stuff and all the other, you have also them that hold to the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Now, we talked a little bit about the Nicolaitans the other day, but what was it that they did that God hated so badly? Well, let's look at 3 different ways this might come about. First of all, Nicolaitans introduced worldliness into the church. They brought society in and started living the societal life. Do we do that today? Do some churches do that today? Absolutely. I read, and I think I'm right about this, I may be wrong, but I think it was the Lutheran church who got a pastor who was a transgender person. Now, I think they're going to have to answer to God about that. But, that's the way we're headed. That's the way this country's headed. I hope we're not headed that way. But they had a hold over the church. Now, compromise is a bad word when you come to the Lord. You either stay with the Lord, or if you compromise, what you've done is fallen away. You're following the world or following Satan then. So there's really no such thing as compromising with God. You're either faithful or you're not. So how were they able to infiltrate and to take over congregations and become such a powerful sect in this time that we're looking at? Well, first of all, if you're talking about the specific church of Pergamos, this church today that this letter is written to, it was probably small in number, the number of faithful people. But nonetheless, there was a number of people there that were faithful. But there were also a number of people there who were following the perversion of their own beliefs, and they were trying to change the church to their personal beliefs. And these are called the Nicolaitans. If you look at it on a little bit bigger scale, the second step, the church at Pergamos is representative of a piece of church history where the church and government have joined together. Now, what happens when the church and government join together? Then you have non-Christians who are in government power telling the church, this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do, and if you don't do it, then we'll bring, legal or government forces against you. And so there becomes a very gray line between government and church or the Lord. And then thirdly, if you look at it as it's directed toward an individual, and this is what we really want to look at, the individual effect of it, some people begin to pick and choose what they're going to believe, what they're going to do, what they feel like is their responsibility and what's not. I don't need to tithe. I don't make that much money, so I'm not going to give anything back to the Lord. I don't have to go to church on Sunday. I've got all kinds of preachers on TV. I can watch all of them. I can see 4 guys in the time it takes me to go to church and hear one guy. Make up all kinds of excuses, but they make up their own religion. And all of that together is taking away from the Lord, taking away his honor, taking his glory, taking his authority, and putting it in individuals or groups of individuals called a church. And this is what the Nicolaitans were doing. It's no wonder God said, I hate these guys, because that's what they were into. And the bad part about it is, this very same thing is going on today, but you don't hear anything about churches standing up saying, we're not going to put up with that. We just kind of sit back quietly and hope it'll go away. Dr. W.A. Criswell, who was the pastor of First Baptist in Dallas for, I think, 50 years or thereabouts, did a lot of study on the book of Revelations, and he believes that it may be something a little different and more destructive. He took the Greek word Nicolaitan and broke it down to its origin, and Nike is the beginning of it, and that is a symbol of victory given to an athlete in some type of Greek game, and Laos is the word for people. And so together they form the word Nikolaos or Nicolaitans, which is a group or a class of people who exalt themselves in the church. Not exalt the Lord, but exalt themselves over other people. And they start influencing other people and telling other people, this is the way you need to do things, because if you don't, then you're not in God's will. But they're not in God's will, but they're trying to tell you that they are God in so many words. Now, other theologians believe that the Nicolaitans were people who were brought worldliness into the church, and their origin is traced back to one of the very first deacons in the 6th chapter of Acts by the name of Nicholas. And he became a world worshiper more so than a true believer. And these are the guys that they call Gnostics, or they follow Gnosticism. Now, we mentioned this the other day, so here's the pop test. What is the belief of Gnosticism?
No law.
I'm glad you were all paying attention.
I was paying attention, I can't remember.
Well, I'll give you credit. Most of you are old. All right. Gnosticism basically said, you have the spirit over here. God saves the spirit. You don't have anything to worry about. Over here, you have the physical, the physical body. You can do anything you want to because it doesn't have any relationship with the spirit anymore. So you can sin all you want to, and it's not going to have any effect on this. Now, do you think there's people that believe that today?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Because they claim to be saved, but yet they live the life of the devil. Well, I'm not to judge who's saved and who's not saved. God will do that. He'll take care of it. But he does say what? You will know them by their fruit, whether it's good or bad. Read the book of Galatians, chapter 5. In fact, in chapter 5 of Galatians, Paul said, paraphrasing, don't let your faith be a problem that you think you can just freely go and sin. You are under the authority of God. You have accepted God as your personal Savior. You live for Him. You don't have the freedom or an excuse or go past go and get $200 card now to do what you want to just because you say you're saved. You live the Christian life. So fleshly lust had become a part of many of their lifestyles. But don't be too quick to condemn them, because that's the same way we find America today, if you just look a little bit. You recall when Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt, while he was up on Mount Sinai just a few days later, getting the 10 Commandments from God Himself, what were they doing in the camp? Building an idol and having a wild party when he came down. Didn't take them long. The people reverted to what they had been doing for years there in Egypt. You know, they were in bondage 400 years. These people weren't that old, but they'd been doing it for many, many years and teaching it to generations who came after them. But they reverted to the idol worship and the sexual perversions and all that they learned in Egypt. Well, some of the people in the church of Pergamos were doing the same thing. This is the lifestyle they came out of. This is what they were taught as children, and now they've been saved, and all that's supposed to change. You may know, or you can think of someone who made a profession of faith, and as far as you know or anyone knows, it was legitimate, and they truly meant it. They truly were saved, as far as you can tell. And yet, after a short period of time, they're right back in the old lifestyle. Now, what's your first thought? They probably weren't saved. Or maybe something else. I don't know what you're thinking. But I submit to you that some of the blame lies upon the church itself. And the reason I say that is, and you think about this, when you got saved, who in the church, and I hope you got a bunch of names, but I'm suspecting you probably have very few or none, who in the church took you under their wing and said, let me teach you about the Lord. Let me teach you what Christians do. Let me teach you how to live the Christian life. Most churches don't do that. Now, if you join some churches, you're going to get it. The Catholic Church does that, if I'm not mistaken. If you join the Catholic Church, you have to go through a lot of rituals and learn all the things that they do. And so you become indoctrinated into their beliefs and their practices and their, whatever it is, rituals, if you will. My problem with that is we don't do that. Somebody joins our church, we say, boy, we're glad you're here. Go get them. And they don't know what get them is. They don't even know who they're supposed to go get because nobody stops to tell them and teach them. We'll say, okay, go to Sunday school. Does Sunday school have a negative connotation to you? Some people it does, because you're saying Sunday school, that's for little kids. That's Jonah and the whale stuff. I don't need that. I'm a grown adult. Well, we're trying to study the Bible, and that's the reason I hesitate to call this Sunday school, although I do some. I try to call it Bible study because I think that's more what we do here. But think about it this way. You are a farmer, and you're a good farmer, and you grew up in a family of farmers, and you've been taught farming since you were a little bitty kid, and you are a good farmer. You know how to plant crops, when to plant them, how to fertilize, what to do, and all of that, and you grow great crops, and all you've ever wanted to do is be a farmer. All you're ever going to do is be a farmer. You drive a big green John Deere, and you got a 1-ton Dodge truck. It can't get any better than that. And then the economy, the weather, the crops, the locusts, grasshopper, whatever, it all hits you at once and destroys your livelihood. So you got to have some money to live on. So you go get a job operating a big piece of machinery that you've never even seen before. And you go to work that first day, and the guy comes around, all the other workers, and they go, man, we're glad you're here. It's good to have you part of our group. There's your machine. Get after it. And you don't even know where the start button is. And they come back that afternoon. How'd you do today? Well, I couldn't even get the machine started. All right, don't worry about it. We'll teach you that one of these days. Just get out there and do your best. So you apply your farming mentality. You get up early, you stay up late, you work hard, you do your best, but you don't produce anything. How long are you going to stay at that job before you start looking for something else? Well, the symbolism here is the world is farming. We know all about what the world offers. church is operating that big machinery that we don't even know how to crank. And nobody wants to take the time to show us. Nobody wants to take the time to instruct us in how to use it and what to do with it and how to produce a good product. We just say, go for it. And that's the way we treat new Christians in most of our churches these days. And you say, well, that's the preacher's job. He's supposed to do that. You remember when the people went to the preachers, the apostles, and said, hey, there's some of the women being left out. They're not getting their share of the food. What'd they say? Oh, we'll take care of it. Don't worry. That's my job. I got to do everything. No, they said, get you some deacons and let them handle it. We are supposed to study and be ready to share the gospel and to share it and to grow the church and share, God's word. That's not the preacher's job. He can do it. No question about that. But the job of evangelism is ours, each one of us. What does Matthew 28, 19 and 20 tell us to do? It says, go, and it didn't say just you preachers go, but all believers. You go and you teach and you preach and you make disciples. That is, you teach others how to do what you do and why you do it and what the scriptures say and why you're trusting in the Lord. And then they replicate that. If somebody didn't replicate that, you wouldn't be here today. Because Christianity would have died 2,000 years ago. But there are a few faithful, but not enough to reach the masses. Let me climb off of the box. But I hope that you understand what I'm really trying to say to you. We're doing a poor job as a church. We think we're doing good. Pergamos said, man, we're doing good. Look what God said to us in verse 13. And then he said here, verse 14, I got a few things against you. And I'm just wondering what he would say about Red Springs Baptist Church today if he wrote us a letter. But you're going to have to wait to find out what the rest of the letter says because we're out of time this morning. So we'll pick it up next week. But I hope that you understand what we're trying to say this morning. And I'm not throwing rocks at you. I'm throwing rocks at me, if anybody, but I want you to understand that we have a great responsibility as God's people, but we're not fulfilling it to its uttermost, if you will. All right, let's stand and be dismissed, please.